Hi, hello, and welcome back. Or, if you are new here, welcome. My name is Heather. This is Miss Finn. And in this video, I'm recapping my 17th and 18th weeks of treatment with Spravato. Spravato, or esketamine, is an FDA-approved treatment for treatment-resistant depression that's derived from part of the ketamine molecule. It's a dissociative anesthetic, meaning it causes dissociation, and I also have a dissociative disorder. So in this series, I share my experiences and tips and tricks that I learn along the way, and my overall progress as I undergo this treatment. I'll put my list of tips and tricks up here real quick for you to screenshot if you'd like. And for a more in-depth explanation as to why each of these things are on my list, be sure to check out my week 3 video if you haven't already. I like to begin these videos with a recap of what my weeks were like outside of treatment, like any changes that I've noticed, improvements, setbacks, etc. But if you want to just skip ahead to the treatment experience, that's totally fine. I'll put a timestamp here for you so you can do that. Be sure to stick around after the treatment experience because I answer one of your guys' comments that I think answers a lot of the questions I usually get about the treatment. Overall, I'm still feeling great. I haven't had any noticeable improvements over the last couple of weeks, but I think that's because there isn't much room for improvement left. My depression symptoms are virtually non-existent, and my PHQ-9 score has been 1 out of 27 for, over a month now, maybe more like 2 months. And that 1 is always the same symptom. I just don't feel like I have as much energy as I could have or want to have. But that could very well come down to my lifestyle. I don't work out, although I am changing that in January, so stay tuned. And I'm also chronically dehydrated. Yeah, it's a legitimate problem for me. I just never think to drink water, or anything for that matter. And trust me, I've tried everything from special water bottles, reminders, all of the apps out there. They just don't work for me. If you have any suggestions for me for things that I can try, please leave them in the comments. Even though I don't have as much energy as I would like to have, I will say that my chronic physical and mental fatigue has disappeared since starting Spravato. In fact, it's one of the most noticeable improvements I've had with this treatment. If the way I feel now is the best that I can be, I am totally fine with that. This is literally the best I have ever felt in my life. As far as setbacks go, there have been a couple of minor things that I've noticed in the past couple of weeks, although I really hesitate to call them setbacks because I don't feel like I'm going backwards or that these setbacks are permanent in any way. But there have been a couple of things. While editing my last video, the holiday special, I was feeling pretty burnt out in those last 2 days or so of editing. It ended up taking way longer to edit than I'd anticipated. I wanted it to go out a couple of days before Christmas, but I wasn't able to upload it until the early afternoon on Christmas Day. Although I was a bit disappointed, I wasn't devastated by the setback like I would have been before Spravato. And I still feel excited and motivated to make videos, so I'm not too worried about it. But the fact that I felt burnt out at all was a change. Sorry, my height is going to keep going up and down in this video because I don't know why my knees are hurting. The other setback, or more like, whoa, I haven't felt that in months, happened Christmas night when I had an anxiety attack. In case you don't know, anxiety attacks are a little different from panic attacks in that panic attacks typically happen out of the blue and have no clear trigger and are instantaneous. The symptoms are severe, like thinking you're dying, but they usually peak around 10 minutes and then gradually dissipate. Anxiety attacks, on the other hand, usually do have specific triggers, And the symptoms can range from mild to severe in intensity, and they gradually build over time. They also differ from panic attacks in that they can last for a long time. My Christmas night one is a perfect example. I was watching a makeup artist's videos on TikTok, and she sounded kind of nasally, like maybe congested even. And I realized as I was watching them that I started to have some anxiety. And that's because I have an intense fear of not being able to breathe, which I know that is a very normal and understandable human fear to have. But what's not normal is to have a full-blown anxiety attack at the thought of not being able to breathe. Or thinking that your nasal passages or throat are going to close up for no reason. As I watched these TikTok videos, my anxiety went from a 0 out of 10 to probably about a 4 out of 10. So finally, I stopped watching them. But even though I had moved on to other types of videos that don't trigger my anxiety, I wasn't feeling any better. In fact, my anxiety was gradually getting worse to where 30 minutes later, I was at more of a 5 or 6 out of 10. So finally, I just closed TikTok because I was getting rather uncomfortable. And I went and ate a couple of bites of the food we'd had for dinner. But for some reason, I suddenly had the sensation that something was stuck kind of far back on my tongue. Felt a lot like getting the shell of a popcorn kernel stuck back there. So I went and brushed my teeth and cleaned my tongue, swished and gargled with water, etc. But I could still feel it. Boom! My anxiety shot up to a 9 out of 10. I got super hot and sweaty. And I had all these racing thoughts that maybe my throat was closing up. And I kept telling myself that, of course, my throat wasn't closing up. That doesn't just happen. This is a very common anxiety trigger of mine. I'm fine. There's not really anything happening. It stayed at a 9 out of 10 for probably about 10 to 15 minutes. And then very, very gradually receded over the course of the next hour or so. But what was really striking to me was experiencing that again after not having anxiety or panic attacks for a few months now, pretty much since starting Spravato. And I just kept thinking, I can't believe I used to feel like this all the time. So I don't know why that happened, but the next day, I suddenly remembered that last year, right around this time, I had 9 out of 10 anxiety nonstop for about 2 weeks. It was hell. I have no idea why that happened last year. My therapist and I tried poking around a little bit to see if we could figure it out. Like I've said before, I have a dissociative disorder and a lot of family trauma. So it's not at all out there to consider that maybe I've got something locked away in here that's getting triggered by the holiday or just this time of year. And the fact that I had an anxiety attack again this year on Christmas Day kind of leads me to think that maybe there is something there. I don't know. My point in even telling you all of this is that I don't know if the anxiety attack was a depression or anxiety disorder related thing, or if it was something else, like a repressed trauma thing. Those were really the only notable things over the last couple of weeks. So let's move on to the treatment. This was probably the most nonsensical fever dream of an experience that I've had yet. I was really tired going into it because I had to get up pretty early for the appointment, and I felt there was a good chance that I was going to fall asleep. That was fine with me because I felt like that only improved my chances of not having anxiety during the treatment, and because Alice recommends going to sleep if you can during the treatment. I mentioned in my last video that these last few treatments have felt more like some of my first few treatments, in that they've been really intense, like not in a bad way. It's like the difference between being on a slow-moving roller coaster and one that's fast and full of sharp turns and bends and loops. After my third dose, I put on my breathing exercises and guided meditations and just kicked back and waited for things to begin. And much to my delight, I effortlessly slid into the sweet spot. If you've watched my other videos, you already know what I'm talking about. But for those of you who are new, the sweet spot is what I call the ideal state during treatment. Or ideal for me, anyway. It feels very similar to when your alarm goes off in the morning and you hit the snooze button and your bed has never been comfier. And all of the thoughts and responsibilities of your day haven't even entered your mind yet. And you just kind of blissfully doze off, maybe even dream a little, until your alarm goes off again. It's a lot like that. Just completely relaxed, a quiet mind, and that nice kind of sleepy. So anyway, I was in the chair and more kind of sitting up with my legs propped up, and I was holding a pillow to my chest. But as I sat there in my perfect cocoon of bliss, I started to feel like the pillow was more like a large ball that I was holding to my chest. And physically, I felt like I was expanding, much like I did during my first treatment. And then, this is so weird and hard to explain, but I'm gonna try. I felt my consciousness as one, but also in separate pieces and in different places, all at once. And I also felt like my consciousness was in the general vicinity, but a little beyond my physical body. As I sat there experiencing this, the thought popped up in my head that my experience of life is confined and very limited to the things my brain is equipped to experience. Like how the things we see are limited to whatever's in the visible light spectrum. But there are other forms of colors or light that aren't visible to us, like radio, infrared, ultraviolet, X-ray, and gamma ray. And I thought about Wi-Fi and the internet and all of the things and information that exists in that digital space and is only accessible with certain forms of technology. And I wondered if there are other invisible things all around us that we just haven't been able to access yet. Naturally, this line of thinking led me to my frequently traveled Spravato trip lane of revelations about the universe and the nature of existence. I don't know why my brain seems to default to this stuff. Please let me know in the comments if you've experienced the same thing or have any idea as to why that is. The thoughts I was having were things like how the universe is infinite and that even our entire known universe is like a cell in a much larger organism. And I was really tripping out about the Big Bang and what all that means. Really, just think about it for a second. If we go off of the theory or assumption that every bit of matter in the universe came from a single high-density source, what the fuck is that?
What is this?
How did it get there? Why is it there? Why is it not somewhere else? And the empty space. What is that? And then I saw the entire universe as a flat plane with all of these other parallel universes that are existing simultaneously but are just inaccessible to us. And we have no way of interacting with them or even conceiving of what exists there. And then my perspective zoomed back in on me in the chair doing my Spravato treatment, and I felt like an ant whose entire world and experience of life the dirt, the grass, other ants, is a mere speck compared to the vastness that is the earth. And how an ant could never and will never have any understanding of what it's like to be us and the things going on in the world and what the earth really is. And that's usually how I feel about myself and my life during treatment, that I'm essentially living my entire life focused on a single blade of grass. But there's all this other stuff going on all around me. And if I could somehow live with the constant awareness of that, then the blade of grass would seem rather insignificant. And I was really starting to go down a rabbit hole when the tech interrupted me to take my blood pressure. Once that was done, I got comfy again, closed my eyes, and proceeded to have the most indescribable experience I've ever had. I was still in the sweet spot, but I kept seeing things that I genuinely can't describe. There were only a few things that I can kind of describe. One of them was a man that was standing with a laptop in his hands, and it looked like he was doing something on it. But he no sooner appeared before he was spaghettified and disappeared into the background of all of this other stuff that was coming up simultaneously. And what's funny is that even in the moment, I was thinking, oh, there's no way I'm going to be able to explain this to you guys. And that's pretty much what I experienced for the rest of the treatment. It also felt like I went through a time warp because I know I didn't fall asleep, but time went by really fast. I'm sorry these last 3 or so treatments haven't been very eventful. So to make it up to you guys, I thought I'd respond to a comment that was left on my last Spravato video because I think it answers a lot of the questions that people have about the treatment. This comment from Callie A says, honestly, I'm glad you talk about your experiences because when I started ketamine, I expected it to be all like a movie going through past trauma and old memories. And sometimes it is, or a symbol of that, but most of the time it can be kind of silly. I found the importance is in how it makes you feel in the days following. Maybe you can talk more on that. Where do you find the benefits come into play the most? Thank you for the great comment and question, Callie. Before I started Spravato, I also was really worried that I was going to experience essentially a movie of my past trauma. And because Spravato causes dissociation, and I already have a dissociative disorder that I only have because of the trauma I endured in childhood, I was really afraid that I was going to end up reliving that. Oh, shoot. Another fear I had was that I wouldn't be able to control the experience and would essentially just be at the mercy of whatever my brain decided to bring up that day. Like being stuck in a nightmare you can't wake up from. I've done 18 treatments now, and I'm happy to report that neither of those things have ever happened to me during treatment. I'm always aware of where I am, what I'm doing, what's going on, etc. And I've never relived past trauma or felt like I was stuck in a dream and thinking that that was reality. I really want to know if you experience this as well, but when I talk about the things I see, I'm seeing with my mind's eye. I know I went over this in a previous video. I don't remember which one. It's the same thing as picturing something in your mind. Like if I tell you to think of a chair right now, something has come up in your mind. And you're not actually seeing it, but you're seeing it. You get what I mean? Or maybe a better example would be like if you've ever done a guided meditation that has you visualize things like walking through a forest, let's say. And you're really in the zone. You don't have any of your usual thoughts running through your head. And you're visualizing the path the trees, the stream running alongside you. But you're still very aware of where you are, what you're doing, etc. It's like that. But instead of having to struggle to quiet my mind and focus on visualizing things, it's like Spravato just blocks out any of the thoughts that I have about my real life. And instead of visualizing walking through a forest, my imagination gets turned way up and I go on a pretty wild ride. It sounds like we've even had similar experiences of old memories or trauma coming up, but that it's usually symbolic or just kind of silly. The one time I did have a trauma-related experience, it was symbolic and had a very positive psychological effect on me. I talk about it in my week 2 video, but basically I was in a gondola floating down a stream, and I realized that there was all of this heavy stuff hanging off the sides of my gondola, and I understood all of the stuff to be my trauma. And as I was looking at all of this stuff hanging off my gondola, I heard my own inner voice saying things like, you can let this stuff go. Like, you don't need this. You can just let it go. And for some reason, something clicked in my brain, and I was like, oh yeah, you're right. I don't need any of this. And I proceeded to cut it off of my gondola. Now, that doesn't mean that any of my trauma has gone away, but I don't know. Somehow it did something positive. I really can't describe it. I've also been able to regain control of my experiences or where my mind goes if things start going down a path I don't want to go down. It's only happened like 2 or 3 times, and I was very quickly able to go, whoa, nope, not going down there, and move on. As for how I feel in the days following treatment, there's really not much I can say. I've never felt profoundly different in the days following a treatment. I think the only time I really did notice a difference was the evening after my 3rd treatment, which, now that I think about it, might have been the gondola experience treatment. I'm going to need to look that up, because if so, that's actually a big deal. But the evening of my 3rd treatment, I was making dinner, which up until then was something I hadn't really been able to do in years. So that should have been a clue to me that I was feeling noticeably better, but for the most part, that went unnoticed. What I did notice while making dinner was that I felt noticeably less terrible. I think those were the words I used. That I didn't feel good, but I felt noticeably less terrible. And if I had my gondola experience during that treatment, that's going to be mind-blowing. I'm talking about the fact that I had the experience during treatment of freeing myself from my trauma and then immediately felt noticeably less terrible after that. I would say that's more of a PTSD thing than a depression thing. But other than that, I don't recall a really noticeable difference after any particular treatment. Instead, what I would notice were that things that had been extremely difficult, if not impossible for me to do, were getting increasingly easier. Like, I'd realize that, oh, I've prepared every meal for myself for the last week. That's a positive change. Or that just routine tasks that seemed way too difficult for me for years just weren't a big deal anymore. It was more like that. Like, I would realize days after that there had been some improvement, but I never felt a definite before and after treatment improvement, if that makes sense. The benefits or improvements that I've noticed the most have been, in no particular order, number one, my creativity coming back. I've really been loving that one. I thought that was gone for good. Number two, I don't struggle with fatigue anymore, mental or physical. I can think more clearly, problem solve, basically just do everything with little to no effort now. Again, huge improvement for me. Number three, routine, everyday things no longer feel like a big deal or too much for me to manage. Number four is that I now have this sense all the time that things are going to be okay. Before Spravato, I always felt like calamity was just unpredictable and lurking around every corner and was constantly bracing for it, if not expecting it. Whereas now, I just don't feel like that anymore. I just feel like whatever happens, things are going to be okay. And last but not least, I feel like I have a future again. And this one might be more of a PTSD thing, having a sense of a foreshortened future. I still can't really discern what I want or where I ultimately want to go in my life. Because, still have a lot of trauma I need to work through. But the difference now is that I feel like I have a future. Like, it's there. And I'm gonna get there. I actually feel like I have a life and I'm interested in living it and I'm enjoying living it and feel comfortable with things unfolding slowly. And I feel like there's all of these possibilities and opportunities that are coming. I really hope that answered your questions. Let me know in the comments if there's anything I missed or if you have other questions. Love to answer them. I think that does it for this video. If you liked this video or found it helpful in any way,
like, subscribe, comment, blah, blah, bloody blah. Thank you very much.
And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for me, please leave them in the comments and I will respond to them. And with that, I hope you all have a great week and we'll be seeing you next week. Say goodbye, Finn. Okay, bye.